Hi, everybody. Welcome to Leadership from the Heart today. It's so good to be here with my dear friend, Renee, and I'm super excited to share some quality conversation with Simon Chen. Simon, thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Simon.
So Simon and I had the opportunity to meet last year at a conference, and we were on different panels. I joke because you're the techie one on the techie panel, and I'm the non-techie one on the non-techie panel. But we sure did have a good time at dinner and conversations with a bunch of great people. And so we're so excited to have you join us today. And thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Yeah, absolutely.
So Simon is with Realogy, and EVP of Product and Innovation is your title. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about your background and your story and what you're doing in your role, and let us get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So the short version of it, which I'm sure the viewers would appreciate, is I started out in my career in actually investment banking, right? So we were doing big deals early on in my career. And I think what I realized pretty quickly, I remember actually the moment I was sitting on my back deck drinking a Bud Dry. Do they even make that anymore? It's like a different beer that they had back then. I didn't know about.
I've never heard of that one, Simon.
I'm going back to college days, Simon, on that one.
Yeah, it's like next I'll start talking about Zimas or whatever, right? But so I'm sitting there, and I was obviously young. It was my first job out of school, and we'd just done this big deal. Basically the deal that created Splenda. So, this was a million years ago, and it was kind of a cool transaction. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking to myself, I kind of feel like I've peaked in my career, even though I've only been working for a few years. There's got to be more to working than this. There's got to be more to career than this. And so that's when I realized, like, I wanted to learn more about the businesses as opposed to just how to talk about businesses at a cocktail party or something like that, right? And that's when I actually left that company and joined one of the companies that we worked with, which was a technology company. And I learned from the ground up again, sort of operating chops, if you will, And then, that was the dot-com days. And then after the whole dot-com bubble blew up, I said, my next company is going to have assets that I can physically touch. And so I started a real estate company because, myself and my family had been investing in real estate for a long time. And so I started a real estate brokerage / consulting company all those years ago. And, since then I've run brokerages. I've headed up some, most recently I was CEO of ERA, so one of the Realogy brands. And then as of basically the beginning of this year, I'm the head of our new product and innovation group. So not immediately evident. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about what the product and innovation group does. So there's really like 4.5 to 5 parts of my organization. So product, obviously, right? So we're the business component driving sort of vision and project management of products for all of Realogy. And then also the learning organization, so all the training, coaching, and learning that goes on across all of our brands, agent recruiting and retention, strategic alliances, and then the last sort of half bit is our corporate ventures group, our venture capital component. So a lot of groups. I mean, basically our charter is to leverage the scale of Realogy to drive value for our network of 300,000 agents globally across our 6 brands or so, and it's been exciting. It's I've got a bigger sword basically to wield to get stuff done, and that's exciting.
So just a small little role there for 300,000 agents wide, right?
It's a lift.
Yeah,
it's definitely a lift, but yeah, I mean, but it's important, and that's what gets us up and gets us to the office or not, right? These days, every day, just is sort of the excitement and the good work that we're doing,
Well, and there's been so much, I mean, there's always talk about technology, but especially right now, and in the situation that the globe is experiencing, technology is first and foremost forefront of most of the conversations we have, right? Regardless of what industry you're in. So I know you guys are having tons of conversations as it pertains to technology, but keeping that in mind, you've been in real estate a long time. I didn't realize you had such an incredible background in the real estate. So it's not that you're just coming in as a tech guy in a space that you don't really understand. You have the experience and knowledge. So in the last 10 years, what do you think has been the single biggest advancement in real estate technology?
I mean, it's around that time frame because the DOJ judgment that sort of freed up the MLS listing information was around like 2008 or so. So I would say, still online listing search, right? The portals, Zillow's, Realtor.coms, et cetera. Interestingly enough, I was at Realtor.com for 5-6 years or so. And so when, agents come up to me at conferences and they ask me like, is the internet going to make my job obsolete? Are they going to make me go away or what have you, right? And I say, no, actually, I view the portals as enablers, as weird as that sounds, as much as there's all this noise around them being the, disintermediators or what have you. I actually view portals as a way to demonstrate the depth of knowledge that real estate agents have to their consumers. So what do I mean by that? Look at like LegalZoom or like WebMD that are out there, right? Like a tremendous amount of publicly available knowledge or data that's out there for the average consumer to, consume. So like my wife and I had a baby like 6 months or so ago, right? And so baby has a rash. So my wife gets on WebMD and Googles rash, right? You do not want to do that, by the way.
Never do that.
Right? Like
right.
30 different conditions with pictures, right? Which is not a lovely idea, which of course sets my wife off the deep end thinking that my baby has like some obscure random disease, from something far away. So the point is that, all this online content, if anything else, shows the consumer how much they don't know, right? And so they want to go and refer to a doctor because I know I got the bill, right? To find out whether your baby actually has this, mysterious random disease or whether it was just that, she's eating too much fiber, that kind of thing, right? And so, I think portals actually are great enablers to real estate agents because they allow us to be able to do higher value functions, which is guide our clients in a more intelligent way as opposed to just having, showing them listings as our value add or our contribution to the relationship.
That's such a great reminder, Simon, is that we shouldn't fear the technology. We've talked many times, Elizabeth and I, on the show to many of our inspiring guests, and it really is keeping the mindset that the technology is a tool in the tool chest. And so let's put as many tools in the tool chest as we can to not only provide better service to our customers, but also bring in new efficiencies that help us clear the path to providing the best opportunity for the customers as well.
That's right. I mean, if your time is no longer spent, compiling that big brochure or manual of listings or whatever, and then having to drive it around, or the first time your clients are seeing anything, this is going back old school, right? Is when you show up with that brochure or that manual or those printouts. Now you can actually, they already know what homes they might be interested in. They've already seen the insides of them. They already ruled themselves in or out on that property, all, saving the agent a tremendous amount of time. It's kind of like, as a result of this crisis, we introduced a new technology with our partner Front Door, which is American Home Shield, right? Which is a virtual home or listing presentation showing tool. Right. And it's not just something like this where, we're looking at each other, what have you. What's cool about it is that you're both looking at the same view through the clients or the sellers, sort of phone. Right. And you're actually able to guide them through it. So you can like use a virtual laser pointer and say, look at this or look at that. Or you can take pictures or take video through your client's phone or your prospective client's phone. Right. And so obviously has a tremendous amount of usefulness right now, even in the sheltering in place, because a homeowner can do a showing, for example, or a listing presentation, or show the agent around the home without the agent needing to set foot in the house. And so, people have said like, is that even going to matter after the restrictions are lifted? And, my belief is that yes, because, an agent that's going to meet with a potential seller, for example, right, doesn't know what the inside of the house looks like, doesn't know how nice it is relative to other homes out there. So agents can't run meaningful comps until they've had that first meeting, right? Now you could see everything that's out there. You could have even taken pictures. You can pull comps or examples of redecorating or what have you from, other things, so that when you get face to face with that potential client, that interaction can be that much more meaningful, and you can differentiate yourself from some other agent that comes in there that still needs to have a follow-up meeting in order to have a meaningful conversation. So I think there's tremendous benefit to it.
You're speaking our language, because right now the strong agents really need to be focused on, okay, there were some technological tools and some resources that have now been adopted by both the consumer and the agents out of a necessity in many cases, right? Being quarantined. The conversation that I can speak on Elizabeth's behalf, we both feel that should put more pressure on is the continued adoption of those technological advancements so that it's more of a standard in the industry. And maybe one example is instead of 20 showings, we're doing 4 or 5 showings. That's a benefit to the customer. That's a benefit to the agent. So you're really speaking our language, and I love the way you're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even things like this, right? Like having Zoom calls or having, online calls. Historically, it's been, sort of taboo almost, right? Because like if you're a client or you're a business contact and you're having a meeting, what, you couldn't get in a plane, come and sit down in front of me face to face. You got to do this over a webcam call. It seemed very impersonal up until the point in time that everybody's doing it. Now it's the new normal, right? Like people can, oh, that's a terrible word. I know it's a buzzword. I should strike it from my vocabulary. But, people are able to now, whether it's in sweatshirts and hoodies or whatever, have these calls and nobody feels slighted as a result of it, right? Yeah. And so we'll continue to do more of this, even after the coronavirus crisis is over, right? I mean, that whole concept of needing to fly 6 hours or 10 hours, sleep overnight at some hotel, eat crappy hotel food, to get up the next morning and have that meeting and then do it all backwards again. So 25 hours or so basically to meet with like one person, I think is by and large part going to go away, right? You're going to reserve those for like, the really, really big important things. And, people are going to be a lot more open to having meetings like this.
Well, and Renee and I are on a platform. Our company has been virtual. So we've been operating this way. Well, the company's been operating this way for about 10 years, right? And so what was really neat about not neat, I guess I shouldn't say that, but what offered the opportunity is when this all happened, we were operating business as usual in a sense. However, it did allow and open up other opportunities that I hadn't considered before. For example, real estate is still trading. It is really, really, really busy. And I've had so many phone calls with people saying, how's the market? Tell me really what's going on. From all over the country. I'm like, let me tell you what my experience is. But instead of me getting on a phone call, right, because I hate being on calls. I am one of those people, I will not pick up the phone and call my clients and if I don't have something to talk about, I think it's ADD and I'm short and sweet, I'm not going to get on a call. But I have referrals and people coming and new clients that instead of saying, hey, let's get on a call, let's jump on a video conferencing real quick. So it's not even me saying, well, are you available for a call? I'm like, here's my link. Let's go ahead and get on. And so now it's actually building those relationships earlier than I ever did before.
Absolutely.
And I'm seeing a response rate and a productivity and efficiency rate that I never saw before. And so that's a big aha moment for me. Yes, we've been operating virtually. We have all these technology tools in the toolbox. I think I'm pretty set. And then I'm opened up to other things that's going to change my business moving forward. And I don't know that I'll go back. I don't know that I'll go back to having just phone dialogues with incoming clients. I want to see them face to face. So it's really neat to see how we're able to pivot and share with each other as we're emerging out of, the situation we've all been in.
Yeah, in an ironic sort of way, there's a silver lining to all these, web conferences and stuff, which is, I'm using a background. Obviously, I'm not actually at our headquarters office or what have you. But if you saw my office that I'm in, I've got all these paintings that my daughter has done, like sort of hung up in a display on the wall and stuff, right? And so in a weirdly perverse sort of ironic sort of way, you're actually getting insights into people at a more personal level, even though you're doing more of it remotely than you would have if you were just meeting at some office in an impersonal sort of environment. You're seeing like people apologize if like they're, it's like that BBC video where the guy's like baby comes crawling in on the walker, and then the wife like screams and tries to drag the baby out, right? Like, right? And like he's maintaining like a nice stiff British face while he's doing it. But it's that sort of thing. Like I actually like when somebody's dog or cat or child, naked baby or whatever comes running across the screen, because that personalizes it, right? And that obviously wouldn't have happened in the office or what have you. So in a weird way, it actually, even though everybody's more distant, it actually brings us closer together.
So what do you think? Oh, sorry, Renee, go ahead.
I was just curious with Simon is you have such a great background and you're leading a huge organization. We've obviously all experienced just unprecedented times, and we talk about leadership from the heart. What advice would you give leaders as they navigate into the next phase of the industry?
I mean, it's kind of like what we're looking at Realogy, quite frankly, which is there was some meme, and I've been trying to find it, and I never could, right? Again, but I saw it on Facebook, and it popped up, and I was like, well, that really resonated with me, and then I should have screenshot it or something. But it's basically like, as everybody is in a rush to get back to the old ways, right? Be thoughtful about what it is that you want to bring back with you.
Yeah.
So for example, all of our senior leaders at Realogy, we've recognized that, flying that 10 hours plus staying over the night or whatever, we could have met with 10, 15 people via the web during that sort of time frame each way, right? And that seems to be a much more sort of efficient way to go about doing business. So take the, the silver linings or the positive lessons that are coming out of this, and don't necessarily just go back to the same thing. I mean, like, this is our lobby in Madison. We do not anticipate that everybody is going to go back to this building full time like we did in early March, and I think that's one of the key things, right? The other thing that the crisis is sort of teaching everybody is be much more open and receptive to change. Don't just stick with, what has always sort of sufficed for all those years or what have you. Embrace sort of, new technologies or new things that can help you along and benefit from exposure to them. I remember when I was still practicing in LA, our board flat out refused, for example, to move to super boxes, right? Because everybody was like, no, those brass dial combo lock boxes, like that's what we've been doing for 1,000 years, and we're going to keep doing that forever, right? And I'm like, why? I mean, like, it's so antiquated. There is, especially in our industry, I think, a high degree of resistance to change. And this might have just been something that helped us, shake loose some of those cobwebs. And, that's what my group is basically tasked to do is, challenge the status quo and, drive innovation in a way that really, hasn't been done. And like I said, I mean, that's exciting.
So the interesting thing about Realogy is you're one huge umbrella and you have a ton of companies and brands underneath that umbrella. In your role, how do you differentiate when y'all are coming up with new products or technologies? Because in reality, those brands are competing against each other in the marketplace, even though you're under one company. So how does that work from a technology standpoint when your customer is all the same but all different?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And it's definitely what keeps me up at night. What it implies is that whatever we build from my group, which spans across all of our brands, it needs to be flexible enough to be able to adapt to all of the needs of not just a particular brand, but all the nuances of each of the agents and the brokers within that brand, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, when I was running ERA has this concept of powered by, right? So you can keep your own branding by and large and just have kind of like Intel inside, you have like a little ERA logo in sort of the lower right-hand corner or what have you, right? Which means you don't just stick with the red, white, and blue of ERA's colors. You're using your own palette and then just having, the ERA logo down in the corner. That gives, the system that we've historically, been using for the last 5-6 years called ZAP, frankly, a bit of fits, right? Because it's not used to one-offs. It's not used to sort of like custom configurations and all that sort of stuff. So one of the big advancements that we're working on right now in the next generation productivity hub is that sort of flexibility so that anybody down to the even agent level can, change the workflow, change the look and feel, change the navigation or the appearance or whatever so that they, it performs differently. Now, is that a challenge? Certainly, right? But my wife, for example, has an online business, and when she built out her website, she used Shopify, right? That same platform fits the needs of however many hundreds of thousands of websites that are built on Shopify, and yet each one of them looks and feels and performs very, very differently. It's that same premise, right? Like my group's charter with our technology group in hand is to basically build a platform and architecture that is flexible enough so that it can handle all of those different use cases in an agile fashion. And, I think we've succeeded, right? It is so flexible that we're actually locking down components of it, because somebody could, it'd be like, feeding the baby, like big people food, right? She would just make a mess of it and wouldn't appreciate it at all, and just ruin things entirely, right? Like, if you give them too much flexibility, it's going to become non-brand standard, and it's going to, not everybody's a web designer. It's going to have a poor flow to it, all that sort of stuff. So you're exactly right. I mean, we are basically providing a framework, right, that is fully functional to each of the brands, and then they are configuring it themselves, and then their brokers and agents are configuring it even beyond that. And so it will look and feel entirely differently by brand than everybody else, while still giving them sort of the economies of scale and the efficiencies that we're looking for, because no other competitor without our size and scale could invest in and prop up, frankly, a platform that's, that big and robust.
You were mentioning earlier, Simon, about the shift that we'll all experience as far as how we leverage brick and mortar space. Elizabeth mentioned earlier, we both are in a brokerage that we don't rely on brick and mortar space. And I'm curious so you also said silver linings, which is an interesting thing, because I think it'll be very interesting to see how across the board everyone will understand you don't need to have the brick and mortar. You can adopt technologies that will give you the same efficiencies. So where do you see that going in the future? If we look at the industry, do you see there'll be a hybrid version? Do you think everyone's going to lean very heavily into it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, our industry, but life in general, right, is sort of a bell curve, right? I mean, so there's going to be people that adopt on this end, people that adopt on this end, and then, sort of the mainstream thing. I think that, kind of like the conversation where we talked about web, meetings or what have you, what's happened is that it has shifted web meetings more towards sort of the middle of the bell curve, because more people are adopting it. It's more commonplace. It's more, sort of standardized or what have you. So the interesting dynamic about real estate is that real estate practitioners, agents, right, have by and large always sort of worked from home, right? Like, I mean, that's sort of how our industry dynamic is. And then they go into the office for meetings or what have you. But by and large, most people, except for like big teams or folks that really need to have a physical office because their home, doesn't support it or whatever, are working from home. And so I would almost argue, although I haven't seen any data around this, that real estate agents have been more productive than like other people in other industries, because, we're used to sort of operating in this way. So I think that there will be less. I think that companies like ours, not disclosing anything, just that's the direction that we're thinking, we'll be thinking about different utilizations for 500,000 square feet in Madison, for example, right? I know that, when I was running a 100% commission company, their model was, 1,000 agents could be in a much, much smaller office, right, based out of there, but because obviously very, very few people sort of show up there. We have been more of a sort of a fuller service model, obviously, with the Realogy brands, and so therefore we're used to a lot of physical footprint so that the agents can be there and feel like they're part of this thing. So I think that we're going to move sort of toward a different curve and use our space and think about our space in a different way that maybe folks like you all are already doing. And and that's perfectly fine too. I don't think it's going to make any one thing obsolete necessarily. Like, I don't think all the office space is going to go away, for example. But maybe we think about it in different ways.
You have a question. I saw you.
I know. I was thinking the same thing. Go for it, Elizabeth.
Well, I'm just wondering, there's so many different shifts and disruptions. I don't even like that word anymore. I used to use that word all the time. And then after we had so many different leaders and conversations, I realized the negative tone that can imply, right? So I'm trying to strike that. You said something earlier. I'm trying to strike that from my vocabulary as well. But what do you think is, if you look at the models and real estate in general, there's everything from discount agents all the way up to virtual, right? And that's the cool thing about real estate. And under Realogy, you have a lot of different brands that operate very, very different models independent of each other. So from, we've gone to the virtual companies. What do you think is the next tectonic shift in the real estate market?
You know, I mean, I think a lot, even like with iBuyers, for example, right? It didn't necessarily, and you know, I mean, in order to get funded these days, right, you have to basically say that your model is going to make everything else that came before it obsolete, right? So I don't fault
Right.
them for sort of the approach of pitching it out there, but what we've all sort of come to find is that even with iBuyers, and we're doing it, and you know, is that it does help consumers sort of with a preference if they are in a particular situation where they need to sell, you know, quickly. So it helps them out from a convenience perspective, and that, you know, a lot of folks should be able to offer that to their consumers as opposed to it replacing agents as a whole, right? So I think, you know, a lot of these things that we think are tectonic shifts are actually just sort of evolutions, you know, of the business or what have you. I think the biggest sort of thing that I'm focusing on that I think is going to be the next wave is the idea of the entire home ownership life cycle, not just the transaction, right? The industry as a whole is by and large wrapped up around the transaction, right? There's $80 billion a year that are paid in commission. That sounds like a heap of money. And so everybody wants their piece of that money, right? But as, you know, a former recovering, you know, real estate agent and broker, right? Like, I think a lot about that, you know, that the iceberg under the water, right? If 10% of your transaction with consumers is the transaction itself, right? What about all of that 9/10 under the surface of the water where you're, you know, their local area expert or expert around all things home ownership related, right? So do you have a dog walker, a nanny, a contractor, a church, a restaurant, you know, all that sort of stuff that you stay engaged with them over all that time where agents basically are working for free, you know? And I think that, you know, if we can help agents stay engaged with their clients as well as prospects over that entire life cycle, then it's that much easier for them to re-engage with them, right? They say that it's like, I think it was like 5 times harder to get a new client than it is to keep your old one. Okay, so that's an interesting stat. And yet, if you look at NAR's data, 90% of consumers say that they would work with their agent again right after they've gotten the keys. They're all happy. They carried their spouse across the threshold, that sort of thing, right? But only 12% do after 7 to 9 years. Like, holy cow, right? So if we can help our agents stay engaged with their spheres, right, over that whole 7 to 9 years, then I think that that profoundly impacts, you know, repeat business, referral business, all that sort of stuff, right? Because by and large, it sounds like if they loved you that much, but only 12% are working with you again after 7 to 9 years, they've kind of lost track of you, right? They've lost touch with you. And if that's the case, if we can help them stay engaged, then I think it moves the agent's business forward meaningfully, and therefore ours, because we obviously, you know, we get paid on agents' productivity.
Well, it's funny the NAR stats, because of those numbers too, NAR also states that 83% of agents don't stay in touch with their clients. And that to me was staggering, because that's all I do, right? That's my business is 100% referral, because all I do is stay in touch with my clients. And so when people come to me all the time, they're saying, what do we need to do? How do I need to continue my business? I'm like, well, have you been talking to your clients? Are you being a resource? Is it a relationship, or are you truly just transactional?
That's right.
So I think it's a mind shift as well for agents to kind of understand, oh, it's not just this one-time thing. And it's working smarter, not harder. It's that 80-20 kind of rule where it's so much harder to go find new business. Well, don't. Just service the people who loved you. And that many people aren't doing it. So that was very surprising to me, because when it's something that's just ingrained into what I'm doing or what Renee's doing, it's, you know, easy. And then you look around and you're like, oh, but people aren't embracing it quite like I am.
And most aren't. I mean, you're the far right of the bell curve in our industry, right? Other industries, it's much more commonplace. When I was running my brokerage, you know, I had an awful lot of people that were like laid off .comers like me, right? So they had skill sets from other industries where, frankly, the service level by and large is higher, you know, than it was in real estate. And therefore we did very, very well, because people just weren't used to sort of that service level that we were used to operating at. Same sort of thing. So, I mean, if I could take, you know, your skills at the far right of the bell curve and build them into the system so that it automates a lot of those behaviors that you sort of figured out for yourself, then I can sort of shift the whole bell curve. I know I'm overusing the bell curve analogy, but, you know, I can shift that population of agents to perform more like you, right? Because left to their own devices, you know, they may not think of a lot of those sorts of things, right? And that's where technology can be an enabler as opposed to a disruptor or what have you, right? You're actually applying a lot of those best practices to everybody so that it's not just the top performers that are exhibiting those behaviors.
It's
Yeah.
all about relationships. I mean, it's always been, it always will be about the relationships. And I really agree with you on the correlation. If you look at the many of the successful agents in the industry, they have either learned customer service or come from a customer service background that that becomes almost instinctual for them.
That's right.
You're spot on about the focus to make sure there's continued education about that and perhaps tools. So what I'd be curious is, what are your thoughts on what technological tools should agents be focused on to marry together the service aspect, but also helping the agent stay automated? And the reason I ask the question is because there's a really bad misunderstanding that you can automate the process for the consumer. It's the agent who can have help with some automation, not the consumer. The consumer should never be automated.
Right. So, I think, again, from a technology perspective, the real estate industry is still sort of in its relative infancy, right? It's why, $12 billion was invested in real estate tech. Hey, Dave. $12 billion was invested in real estate tech in 2018, I think, 2019, right, per year. It's because it's sort of a no-brainer, right? Like, if some person at a startup company, a real estate property technology startup company, goes to a venture capitalist and the beginning of their pitch starts with, how the last time you bought that house or got a mortgage, how it kind of sucked? Right? And, the VCs are like, well, yeah, that was difficult. It was challenging. It wasn't intuitive. I felt like I was out of the loop and I'm the one paying the bills and all that sort of stuff. Exactly. This is how my company is going to improve that. That's why all these companies are getting their funding, is like, fundamentally, people feel like the transaction process is flawed in a lot of different ways, unless they've worked with, a really fantastic agent like you all that takes everything throughout the process and does it for them, so that it's just, a very low degree of interaction probably required from them. But again, the exception, not the norm, right? So, I think that, helping them use CRM better, understanding like what CRM actually is, right? It's customer relationship management as opposed to just how to respond to a lead. Like, that's an important differentiation. And then, another passion point of mine is transaction management. Like, there's a lot of confusion around what transaction management is. Is it workflow? Is it compliance? Is it forms? Is it, commissions calculation or back-end accounting, right? Like, everybody sort of lumps it all into transaction management. But in concept, what I love about transaction management is that it is truly the bridge between the home search and home ownership. Right. And if I just shared with you earlier that I'm, passionate about helping our agents stay connected for the home ownership life cycle and moving beyond the transaction, then we need sort of that bridge. And so transaction management can be a way to help provide visibility to the consumers of where they are in the transaction, what steps are still pending, when their contingency dates are, what vendors still need to be brought into the mix, help you interact with those vendors so that, if the consumer says, hey, I need a pre-qual letter, right? Instead of saying, hey, I'll call up this or that person and they'll call you, or blah, 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 you can interact a lot more dynamically. Like, all those steps that take a number of phone calls out to coordinate right now, if we could just bring them all into one collaborative place. Again, you're not automating the consumer, but you're giving them visibility into the steps, and you're giving them visibility into sort of the work product of what we're doing, all of which, makes things a lot better, more helpful, more informed, et cetera, right? Even while the consumer feels more empowered. So, for us, I think that's a big area is, let's migrate from CRM, which has been a huge area of focus, into more of the transaction management so that it becomes more interactive as opposed to just a compliance thing or just trying to get all your forms in one place, which is a lot of what is done out there.
Well, the transaction process, you're spot on, because the transaction process, contract to close, on our team, we call it, it's concierge service, right? There should be service in that part of the process. The whole timeline of our service to our customers is important, but that would be the most critical time. So the service level has to be at the very highest level to make sure that we're approaching everything with the most detailed orientation, as well as understanding that the customer is going through what could be by many one of the most stressful times of their lives. Moving is a stressful time. So you're spot on with that. I love your thoughts around that.
Yep.
I agree. I am not the techie one again, right? But I'm fascinated by, on a global standpoint, again, you were saying that you've got 300,000 agents globally with all the brands. You know, our company's global now as well, and we're expanding. Where does the U.S. fall in terms of technology adoption? Because I've been on a lot of different calls with leaders from other countries, right? That we're in the UK, Australia, Canada, things like that, and we're expanding. And it's interesting to see, because real estate is so incredibly different in so many of these countries. So where does the US fall in terms of adoption or process or how real estate is done?
Yeah. So I've had a fair amount of exposure to, Europe as well as Asia, just given my prior roles, right? Because we had operations internationally. I would characterize it. I mean, I actually think that we are further along technologically than, a lot of other countries. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, like, Elizabeth just mentioned, like how Australia, for example, or, the UK transact real estate in terms of their exclusive agent models and everything like that are very different from ours, right? Well, actually, how ours is different is that we have exclusive agent, whereas, they don't, right? So, which has prompted MLSs, which has prompted the data feeds on property and agent information and transaction information. So we have been forced, just from how we transact in the US, to build out a lot of that infrastructure, which, feeds a lot of these things. It's why portals, by and large, internationally, have a much, much harder time, because, every region, every country, every whatever tends to operate like New York City, right? Like completely independent, sort of wild, wild west in a lot of ways, where they aren't pulling all the listing information together. They're not sharing it with each other, all that sort of stuff.
There's no clear cooperation.
Exactly right. I mean, there's really not. And so I think we're further ahead there. And then there's the social dynamic too, right? Like I love on my Facebook feed, I have a lot of like our Asian or like foreign agents from ERA, since I was heading ERA before. In Europe, it's tremendously charming to me that, they do a lot of door knocking. They just walk around the villages that are stunning, right? And like put their cards out there and build like relationships from people. And they probably know you're, this or that person's daughter or son or something like that. Like there's already a connection there because the communities are quite small. Whereas in Asia, where it's all about, building new and expansion at like sort of crazy rates, a huge proportion of their business is new project developments, right? So agents are going in and brokers are going in for their agents and working those, sort of huge deals for 5,000-6,000 unit buildings or something like that to get the exclusive on that whole building so that their agents can then go in and sell them, right? So very, very different dynamics. But I would say from a technology perspective, we're probably the furthest along because we have the most distance, we have the most disparate sort of inventory types, and then we also have that competitive and cooperative dynamic of how real estate is transacted here.
I hadn't thought of it that way, actually. And it's good to hear that, because I was thinking the opposite, right? So it's always interesting from the outside looking in, and you're hearing and you're watching the news, and that goes with anything, and you're doing some research, or like we were talking about WebMD, you're just, the story or the picture that's painted is a little bit different, or at least the story I told myself, or I tell myself. So it's interesting and refreshing to hear that, because we do have all the challenges that the U.S. is still working on, and interstate, and even in our local, with the MLSs or national MLSs and things like that. But it's nice to see that those conversations are healthy and moving us forward instead of us being antiquated and behind other countries.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, like, you caught me at a good moment. Any other time I'd be banging my head against the wall saying like, oh my gosh, like, why are we so antiquated? Why can't we get this stuff done? Why can't we get the MLSs to agree with each other? I'm on a panel next week at Inman, right, to talk about data and how, we need to get, a global standard and, around permissions as well as access and data formatting and all that. So yeah, absolutely. But you're right. It's helpful every once in a while to just sort of take a step back and say, how are we relative to other folks, and, and their, how they transact and how they get everything done. And I think we all have something to learn from each other. But from a purely technology standpoint, I feel like, the US is probably ahead at this point in time.
You caught us on a good day too, because while we're talking about technology, there's probably sometimes we might bang our head on the wall thinking, recently we interviewed Margie Grant, for example. She's the CEO of Florida Realtors. She was on the show with Elizabeth and I, and she pointed out that was probably around early April. And she said at that point, over the last few weeks, the number one topic of incoming calls for the Florida Realtor hotline from realtors was, how do I operate Zoom? So in Elizabeth and in my world, right, not only are Elizabeth and I in a brokerage that's obviously cutting edge and tech forward, and we operate our business and have for a long time in very forward thinking ways, but we've been doing video for a decade. We've been utilizing 360 tours for as long as the cameras have been around. And so we looked at that and we said, that's not great news. Thinking about agents not understanding how to operate Zoom, but we're happy to hear the world is going to catch up. That's good in the world of the industry.
Well, and the industry as a whole, right, has been forced to catch up, right? And that's the great thing. It's kind of like my parents never wanted a smartphone forever, right? Because they were like, what am I going to do with all that added complexity, right? Like all I need is literally that thing that flips open and just has the buttons on it, right? Like I make calls, I receive calls. What else could I possibly need, right? It wasn't until my first daughter was born that they saw all of their peers looking at their grandkids on chat or on YouTube or whatever, that they were like, hey, I want that, and then all of a sudden I get a call from my mom like, hey, we want smartphones. And I was like, what? Like, who is this? And it was for exactly that reason, because then they can, see it and then show them off to their friends. I mean, the whole bit. So every person has some sort of a catalyst moment that will get them to sort of make a decision or adopt some technology or do something different. And what's going on around us is a ginormous catalyst basically for a lot of people to think about transacting business in a different way. And like I said, I mean, there's a silver lining to that, right?
Well, I have to say I love your parents, because I'm right there with them. I think I was the very last person to finally relinquish my BlackBerry because they had smartphones. And I loved my BlackBerry, and I didn't care about all that stuff. I was just like your parents. I was like, why do I need all this stuff? And then technology came in, and Supra app came on. And you no longer had the little key, and so I had to have a smartphone to make it work. I was like, all right. And then you're obsessed, and you're like, oh, now I see what I've been missing. But you don't know what you're missing until you get to that. Or even Facebook. I was probably the last person ever to get on Facebook because I had the need for it, and I didn't want the distraction. And then when I joined EXP, that's how we communicated before we had Workplace. And I was like, well, I've got to do it now. And then you join it, you're like, oh, it just opens a whole new world. So
and now look, you're hosting an online podcast, for Pete's sake.
Well, to be fair, Renee, like any of the technical background stuff, she'll ask me, because I'm like, I have no idea. You just push the button. I mean, we had a technical issue one time, and she goes, I need you to take over the control. I was like, help, I don't know what to do. I mean, seriously, that's me. But you're right. It's something that makes you have to adopt something new. And then you're like, oh, that makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, and because everybody's using it, and because, not everybody's expert in it, there's a lot more graciousness on either end of, sort of the web conference, right? People, if you screw it up, you screw it up. I mean, like it happens all the time, or things happen or what have you, or you can just always blame the technology, right? Whereas if you're sitting in front of a person, not a lot of places you can point blame at other than each other. I mean, oh yeah, the internet, oh my, whatever went down or what have you, or my kids are streaming whatever downstairs and it killed my internet connection. I mean, all those things are okay now, but what's neat about web meetings is that, when we had remote staff that were trying to dial into like a conference room full of people that are physically there, they're always the odd man out, right? Because they can never chime in, raise their hand or do whatever. Because nobody's looking at that dumb screen over there with, a few of the Brady Bunch heads sort of sitting there, right, to see if they have a question. Now, what they like is that everybody's on a level playing field, regardless of who you are, what your title is, or whatever. Everybody's got the same, sort of connectivity and the same ability to see each other and speak, and that's the great sort of a playing field leveler, if you will.
So many people that I know have been, they're over video conferencing. They're like, I'm so done. I'm so over it. I look forward to it every single day because I get to have a connection or interaction. And like you said, I'm not getting on a plane, and I get to connect at a deeper level with so many more people than I was able to before. So
yeah, I mean, that's the pros. The cons is that like now my calendar is literally second to second, end to end to end to end to end Zoom calls. It's why I wear, glasses now, right? To like try to preserve my eyes from like all this onslaught. And I bought like my kids glasses too, because, they went from not being allowed to watch TV to all of a sudden sitting there watching the screen for hours each day, like that can't be good. So somewhere after all this settles, there will be a new normal. Again, I use word, which is, not as extreme as this, but also not back to sort of the old normal we had before, right?
We're going to put you in the hot seat now, Simon.
Okay.
Hold on. it's the big one.
Okay.
Simon, you are an inspiring leader, and we would love to know, what does leading from the heart mean to you?
So when I was taking my California salesperson's license and broker's license, I remember they make you certify basically that you're going to follow the golden rule. I don't know if that's the same of, sort of every broker and agent around the country, but it's basically, treat others as you would have them treat yourself, right? And you always hear all those stories about how, like, if you're dating somebody, see how they treat like the waiter or the janitor to see like what's truly in their heart, because, treating you nice when you're on a first date or whatever is, sort of normal. Of course, if they treat you like garbage on the first date, that's probably an even better indicator. But still, like look at how they're treating people that they, that some people might feel are beneath them or what have you, and see what really is in their heart. So I think for me, it's treating everybody, whether it's personally or professionally, as how I would how I would want to be treated, and act that way, because life will be challenging, But as long as that other person feels like, despite what life serves up, right, in a real estate transaction, there's a million things that could go wrong, that we would take their best interest to heart and deal with it in the way that they would if they were that expert or had the knowledge in order to do that, and building that trust relationship. It's why Elizabeth doesn't need to, market, because it's, it's a recurring sort of referrals or existing client base that keeps coming back to you. That is, unfortunately, relatively rare. Right? It's hard to find somebody that, for something that is the largest, most important transaction of their lives, probably, you find somebody that you can trust and just say like, look, I don't know, but I trust that you do and that you're going to help me navigate through it. It's why doctors or mechanics or anybody like that, where, if something went wrong, it could really, really impact, your livelihood, your life, or whatever. And, you leave it in the hands of somebody that is expert, basically, to help you navigate through that. So I think it's as simple as that, right? Is like, whether it's my own staff and like helping develop their careers in the same way that I would have wanted somebody to do it for me, and being very conscious about that, right? And building it into their goals, as opposed to just like what I need them to do for me, but what can the company do for them in order to make it a balanced relationship sort of in the organization. But just little examples of like that, thinking about the other person like you would want from the relationship, and structuring whatever your interactions are accordingly.
I love that. So definitely speaking our language on that. The golden rule, it always goes back to that, but to hear you say that, especially with everything you're involved in, your whole history and background, and that's what it means to you, that's pretty powerful. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing with us today, Simon. We really appreciate you carving some time out for us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was great talking to you all. Hope to see you soon somewhere. Yes. I'll bring the wine.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to hold you to that.
Not a problem. I'm usually not terribly far from the wine. I'm from California. It's just how we roll.
Right. That's right. Simon, take care of you. Take care of that family, and we will look forward to seeing you soon.
Cool. Thanks. Take care.
Bye, Simon. Thanks again. Bye-bye.